Hello. Right, good. I know I said I was going to make this announcement last week. I kind of trailed it on Twitter and Facebook, and then I didn't make it last week, and I've only just made it this week. But as you can maybe still hear, I'm not actually that well. I've had a rotten cold for nearly 2 weeks now, and I've been kind of holding off on making this announcement because I wanted to be quite chipper when I did. But I think this is about as good as I'm likely to feel for the foreseeable future, and I just can't leave it any longer because, let's face it, as of next week, everything just gets buried in Christmas stuff, and nothing which is not Christmas related is going to get through. So I thought I'm going to make this announcement now. And the announcement, as some of you will know, pertains to a decision I have come to on how I'm going to get my writing career moving again, because it's been stalled now for a good 3 years or so. Now, this plan I've come up with, the reason I'm telling you guys is because it's something you can help me with. In fact, it's something I need your help with. At 2 specific stages of the project, I need the help of you, the collective, my Patreon patrons and my online pals, okay? You can be of great assistance to me at 2 stages in this plan. Now, people ask me on a fairly regular basis, when is Terra 3 coming out? That, I know, is something many of you have asked me. It may also be something which doesn't mean that much to some of you. So, for the unenlightened, the story is this. I've had published 2 science fiction novels. I'm kind of aimed at older kids and teenagers and adults as well. Terra came out in 2013. Terra's World, the sequel, came out in 2014. And the plan was very much for there to be a 3rd part. And if you've read the 2nd book, the end of the 2nd book certainly invites it, if not so much demands that there should be a 3rd part to complete the trilogy. And people have asked me, why has there not been a 3rd part? Well, it's a bit awkward. Basically, I was signed up by the publishers who published the first 2 books to write 2 books. And my first idea was to write the first Terra book and then to write something completely unconnected just in case the first Terra book didn't do anything and have like 2 bites at the cherry. But they were most insistent that they wanted it to be a trilogy, and so they really wanted the 2nd book in that 2-book deal to be the 2nd part of the Terra trilogy. So I wrote the 2nd part of the Terra trilogy, and then they didn't renew the deal. I've had a few not entirely compatible explanations as to why they didn't renew the deal. Suffice it to say, I don't think the 2 books sold as well as they wanted to. Certainly, naming no names, blaming no people, burning no bridges, I think mistakes were made in the marketing of the first 2 books. They were kind of marketed as adult science fiction, and that's not really what I'd written. Adults can read them, and adults will, maybe understand some jokes on a level that, because there's jokes in the books as well. They're not comedy science fiction in the sort of Douglas Adams, Robert Sheckley sense of the word, but there's a lot of humour in them because I think, well, it's me. I think there's always going to be humour in anything I do. And like I say, then maybe there's a level of gag that, the adult readers would get that maybe the younger readers wouldn't. But they were very much written for younger readers and then marketed at adult readers, which was a bit of an odd decision at the time, but I kind of went with it because I was a new author. They're a reputable publishing. You kind of assume people know what they're doing. So, yeah, the contract wasn't renewed. I wasn't dropped so much. It's just they decided not to sign me back up again, which then left me in a really awkward situation, as you can imagine, because no publisher is going to sign you up just to publish part 3 of an unfinished trilogy. And indeed, no publisher is likely to sign you up to reprint the previous 2 parts of a trilogy solely in order to then be able to publish the 3rd part of the trilogy. And so the general consensus of opinion between me, my various author pals, and also a literary agent that I signed up with around this time, the general consensus of opinion was that what I needed to do was to write something else entirely, something completely unconnected. And then if we could make a success of that, maybe on the back of this, refloat the Terra trilogy in due course. So I then spent 2 years working on various book ideas that I ended up having to abandon for one reason or another. I spent the first year working on a sort of dystopian idea, nothing to do with Terra, which I then had to bin because a movie got announced with exactly the same premise. Although now I think about it, I haven't heard anything about that movie for a good few months, so it may not be happening. So I might revisit that idea in due course. Anyway, when that fell through, I then shifted my attention to a kids' fantasy idea, which I then spent about 9 months working on. But then I hit an ultimately terminal difference of opinion with my literary agent as regards how this book needed to be written. I had a very, very strong idea about how the book needed to be written, which I just couldn't convince them of, and that meant we stopped working with each other, so I don't have a literary agent anymore. And that was about a year ago. And to be honest, in the last year, I've kind of let the whole thing slide a bit, largely because I've just had an awful lot of other things to do. And this is the problem. You see, this is the way I work. I don't know about you. I know some people can't respond to pressure. I can only respond to pressure. It's the only thing that gets me going. And I've discovered over the years that if I have a specific objective and an immovable deadline, then I can do pretty much anything. Whether it's write a song in 20 minutes or write a book in 3 weeks. If I have a deadline of something which has to be done by that time, then I can do it. And whereas all the stuff that, yeah, that'd be a good thing to do, I should totally do that, that's a great idea, that's just never going to happen. And it's not so much that I can't be bothered with the things that aren't obligations, it's that they get buried under the things that are obligations. So what I need to do to get this up and running again is to create an obligation. And if no publishing house is going to do this for me, then I have to do it for myself, and you have to help me do it. So here comes the announcement. I hereby pledge to have a draft of the 3rd book in the Terror trilogy finished by the end of February 2018. Okay? There will be a draft, maybe not the final draft, but a draft of Terror 3 finished by the end of February 2018. The reason I'm going back to the Terror trilogy is just because that's the book I'm the most motivated to write. From a commercial career point of view, maybe it's the one that makes the least sense, but it doesn't matter. That's the one that I really want to write. Mainly because I just want to complete that story. I want that story to exist as a finished whole. And at the moment it doesn't. At the moment it's kind of hanging in the breeze. So I want to wrap it up. I want to finish that story and have it as a completed piece of work. And so that's what I'm going to do. I will, and you will hold me to this, I will get a draft finished by the end of February next year. And after that, I don't know. I don't know what happens. And here is where you can maybe help me out again. Because then we have to think of what we're going to do with this book, with this draft for Terror 3. Now, I have the rights back to Terrors 1 and 2, so I can do whatever I like with those, okay? They belong to me again, so I can do whatever I want with Terror 1 and 2. Now, I guess my dream scenario, probably my pie-in-the-sky scenario for what we could do with these 3 stories, would be if some, I don't know, plucky little indie publisher takes an interest in this whole sort of human interest story and decides to reprint all 3 books. Well, to reprint the first 2 and print the 3rd one. Maybe in some kind of compendium, maybe at, at a distance of months, and marketed to kids this time, like they were always supposed to be. With groovy little illustrated covers, maybe even illustrated plates inside the books, drawn by whoever's the closest thing to Chris Riddell that I can afford. That is my dream scenario. Probably not going to happen, but it's worth investigating. And if anybody out there knows a way of investigating it, and maybe knows somebody who might want to get involved on this level, please get in touch, either through the Patreon site or at mitchbenn@hotmail.com, and we'll see if we can work on that. If that doesn't happen, there are now, of course, lots of other solutions. Before you say so, Unbound, in this instance, isn't one of them, regrettably. I mean, Unbound is a great thing. It's a great project. I've had friends who've had books produced on Unbound. Unbound won't reprint anything. So while Unbound might well print up and release Terror 3, they will not print up and release Terrors 1 and 2, Terror and Terror's World. They won't touch those. They won't, and I have asked. It's not just their rule. I've asked if they'll make an exception, and no, they won't. So Unbound is not enough. What I don't want is I don't want the books to exist in entirely different sort of media. Wherever book 3 is, I want book 1 and 2 to be there as well. So if book 3 is going to come out in print, I want book 1 and 2 in print at the same place if at all possible. So the thing exists as a unified whole. There are other possibilities. One thing could be I could Kickstarter it. Unbound is not the only way of crowdfunding a book release. I've seen on Kickstarter that there are people funding book releases on Kickstarter, so that might be a possibility. Now, I've never done anything on Kickstarter. I'm a bit nervous about Kickstarter. I seem to have gotten the hang of Patreon, and thanks again for everybody who signed up to the Patreon thing. And yes, phew, that fee change is not going to happen. Thought I was going to have to make a video about that, but I don't. I've never done anything on Kickstarter. Maybe there are people out there who've got some hints as to how we might be able to float the Terror Trilogy as a Kickstarter project. How would we do that? Would we try and float it as 3 separate projects, or one project to publish 3 books? Again, maybe that's not viable. I don't know. This is something you can help me with. There is also now a kind of an intermediate phase between crowdfunded paper publishing and electronic publishing, which is stuff like Lulu. A friend of mine, old friend of mine, Stephen Brotherston, published a book this year called Scarred for Life. About terrifying kids' pop culture in the 1970s. And he put that on Lulu. Lulu is almost like a sort of Zazzle or Cafe Press for books. The book comes to your house printed and bound, but only because you've ordered it. You order the book and they print it and bind it special and send it out to you. So there is no print run. They just make individual books to fulfill individual orders. So that's a possibility. You know, that maybe put all 3 books up on Lulu. That's a possibility. And if all else fails, can always just bung the whole lot up on Kindle. You know, anybody can publish anything now electronically. I'm not necessarily thinking of that as a last resort. My only misgiving about it is because anybody can publish anything, there is an awful lot of dreck online in the sort of electronic self-publishing world, and it's kind of difficult for stuff to get noticed just because there's just so much. But, you know, the Terror books having already had this previous existence, who knows, they might be able to carve themselves out a bit of a niche. Anyway, that's always there. So if nothing else, if the wheels are not turning in any other direction by, say, the end of the summer next year, then sod it. All 3 books just up on Kindle. But that way, at least, hopefully, you will be reading Terror 3 by the end of the summer. Although, of course, if I'm really lucky and this does actually become a proper publishing project, then, yeah, it's probably going to take longer than the end of the summer before you get to read it. But there you go. That's my pledge. I'm going to get it written. You're going to hold me to that. And once it's written, hopefully, you might be able to help me find something to do with it. So, I'm not sure what else I can tell you. I could always tell you this.